Job chapter 8, verse 8. For inquire, I pray thee, of the former age, and prepare thyself to the search of their fathers. I want to give all praises and glory to Yahawah, bahasham, Yahawashi, and double honors to the apostles and elders of Yasharahla, and salutation to the Ahchyam throughout the four corners of the earth, preaching the truth and sincerity, and keeping the faith of Yahawashi and the gospel. This is Yasharahla. I just wanted to go into another part of the icon series, which basically just kind of going over, some of the past, images that were basically hidden, from our people. But of course, during these times, it's now being revealed back to us to stir up the remembrance of a time in which our people ruled, which is during the Middle Ages. And this particular lesson is going to be focusing on Casimir the Great. And Casimir the Great was a king in Poland. In fact, he is considered the greatest king of Poland. And as you see, with the image, that, he was a Jake. And, of course, some of these things are starting to be revealed, in the latter days as we're approaching, the end of Esau's reign, showing that this man is really the devil. He's a liar. They have other images as well that they actually made to counter the original image of King Casimir. And the reason why they've done that is because they're trying to hide the remembrance of that time in which they were nobodies, and the time in which they basically were in subjection and they were in caves. But around this time, which was about the late 14th century, this is when they were really starting to kind of gain an influence and foothold into, Jake's kingdoms. And that's one of the things that we got to realize, is that a lot of this stuff was happening, slowly. It wasn't like Esau came out the caves and all of a sudden just took over stuff, And one of the things about King Casimir, he was known as a peasant king, which I'll get into a little bit, in this lesson, just to kind of get some more edification on part of the reason why our people went down. Because one of the things we got to understand is that, we got to look into the past of what happened, all right, with our forefathers, and what's one of the reasons why they fell, why we ended up falling as a people. But as far as with this, King Casimir was the king of Poland. Now, this is the reason why we always stress that if you ask somebody who their forefather is, just because someone says that they're from Poland or their forefathers came from Poland doesn't mean that they're an Edomite. And this is a great example as to why. Because you had a lot of Jakes that were in Poland during the time, all the way over to, the 14th, 15th, and 16th century, okay, that were still there, and that you're going to have people that are going to be descendants of those Jakes that were there, but they're probably not going to look like Israelites anymore, all right? So that's the thing that we have to be very aware of. That's part of the reason why, I'm doing this icon lesson, because a picture, says 1,000 words. All right, so going into this lesson with King Casimir, it says that, he was a king of Poland from 1333 to 1370, called the Great because he was deemed a peaceful ruler, a peasant king, and a skillful diplomat. Through astute diplomacy, he annexed lands from Western Russia and Eastern Germany. Okay, so that shows you even the reach of where our people control, because like we always say, that our people controlled Europe, but then it's hard for people to think past, certain territories, whether they're thinking of just basically, we ruled Great Britain, or we ruled Italy, we ruled Sicily, and, we ruled, the Byzantine Empire, but then we skipped some of these other areas that we also ruled as well. Okay, so we ruled all of Europe. When Esau went down, okay? Just like it says in the book of Revelation, and he was bound, right, for 1,000 years. Okay, so there was no Edomites basically, just ruling on a level during that time period. It was a time when the Most High would let him loose, that he was going to basically take over those things that we built up over those 1,000 years, which includes the different crowns all throughout Europe, the names, okay, which we'll get into as well, because the names, so even all these so-called Polish names, all right, all your broskis that are out there, those names originally were tied to Jake. As you see in the image with the Nature Knows No Color line by J.A. Rogers, you see that in Central Europe they had different crowns, right? And these are some of the coat of arms that were there during the time in which our people ruled, showing you that you had Israelites in those different lands. And then you're going to have people that were scattered, all right, that are people that are still scattered over there. And there's Israelites everywhere. And that's one of the things that we have to get into our head. And that's part of the reason why I'm doing these icon lessons, to kind of show just the breadth and the reach, all right, of our people. All right, now primarily I'm focusing, on Europe for now, with this, because there's a lot of different images and icons to kind of go over. All right, now when you go a little bit further, like he says, it says he annexed lands from Western Russia to Eastern Germany. And that shows you that our people were also over there as well. Now, when you see, it says, within his realm, he unified the government, codified an unwritten law, and endowed new towns with this new self-government of the Magdeburg Law, and founded Poland's first university at Krakow in 1364. So the first and oldest university in Poland was created by a Jake. So now who do you think primarily is running those different schools that Jake set up? All right, nowadays, Edomites. And this is part of some of the things that happened during that time, was these type of things were being set up. And then you had basically these Edomites that were starting to come in, and they were starting to get trained up and starting to learn and get their understanding and get built up to basically eventually, take over what was built up, during the time of King Casimir, which is basically the greatest reach of the Kingdom of Poland during that time. Now, I'm going to kind of skip down. I'll put the link in the description box. This is coming from the Encyclopedia Britannica. I'm just going to kind of skip down a little bit and kind of go into just the foreign policy. I'll put up the map as well. It says here, Casimir's foreign policy reflected his character, prudence, cool, obstinate, and self-controlled. He preferred diplomacy to war, though he did not entirely refrain from the latter, as shown by a series of forced occupations of foreign territory, notably Red Russia, Eastern Galicia. Right, as you know, you have the book, The Russian Icons, as well, that shows all the dark melanated images of Israelites that were in those different lands. Okay, and so it says here in 1340 and 1349. At the beginning of Casimir's reign, Poland was beset by several difficulties. The King of Bohemia claimed the Polish crown. The German Knights of Teutonic Order disputed Eastern Pomerania, and the country lacked powerful allies. So basically during this time, Jake was going to war with each other. And this is part of the thing that basically the curses were coming upon our people to basically get us out of the way, because of course our people were going to go off after 1,000 years. It was going to get to the point where the Most High was going to say, he was going to start that reign for Esau to basically bring us into the time that we're in now. All right, so during that time, Jake was going to war over different territories and lands and influences. You had a king of Bohemia who claimed the Polish crown, where King Casimir is from, and then you had German knights as well that were also coming up against, King Casimir and his reign during that time. So it says here now, when you go later on, as far as what happened, eventually it says by a series of treaties concluded with Hungary, Bohemia, and the Teutonic Order between 1335 and 1348, Casimir obtained a strong ally in Hungary and dropped his claims to Silesia and East Pomerania, claims that would in any case have been difficult to realize. The Bohemian king in exchange dropped his claims to Poland, and the order withdrew from the territories of Kujawi and Dobrzyń, which it had occupied. Having secured his western frontier, Casimir was now able to occupy the former duchies of Halik and Vladimir, Red Russia, and to unite them step by step through, though never completely, to Poland. As a result of the carefully planned policy, the Mosavian princes, long anxious to preserve their independence, declared themselves Casimir vassals. Even in the west, some German nobles preferred Casimir to the Brandenburg lordship. So basically, as you see there, it's just showing you why he's called Casimir the Great, because of what he was able to do and accomplished in a short period of time by taking over different territories and basically developing stronger allies and, expanding what now as Poland. And it shows you that a lot of these Edomites that you see here today, which again, when I'm talking about Edomites, I'm talking about the people that are really Edomites, okay? So we got to get spiritual, but I'm just talking from a technical aspect that you got a lot of our people that are out there that are going to have these Polish names, but they're Israelites, okay? And then you see that also you got a lot of people that are Edomites. They're going to have these Polish names, but where did they get these names from? They got these names from Jake, who had these names during the time of the Middle Ages. So a lot of these Edomites, what they did is all they did is just take over the names of Jakes that once had those names. They adopted those names unto themselves, and they called themselves by those names, just like Esau does today. Esau calls himself a child of Jacob. You got those gutter rats in our land? Don't they say that they're the people of the book? So why wouldn't they do anything else as well as far as taking on these different names? So that shows you just how deep this thing is that how much of our people could really be, scattered across the earth. That's why it says in the book of Revelation, right, that no man could number. Okay, that can number, all those different people that were coming out of all these different nations, peoples, and tongues that were Israelites. Because it shows you how far reaching this thing is, man. That's the reason why we always stress we got to be spiritual. But again, I'm showing something that's on a physical level, which is basically King Casimir, right, who is definitely a Jake, and showing you just the old images, because we still got to go into the history of this whole iconoclasm, which is the destruction of images, because that's a big part of the hidden history. And also it shows you just the level of the gospel as far as reaching the scattering, showing you that our people were not just in the west coast of Africa, they were not just in the British Isles, in the island of Sicily or whatever. They were throughout Europe, they were in Russia. So that's the reason why we got to get more spiritual, that when someone comes up or has a question or whatever, you just got to basically let the Spirit deal with it and let that person be justified by faith. But at the end of the day, we still got to bring this history so that way people can be edified as well. Okay, so now part of the reason why I wanted to kind of go into King Casimir, which is to kind of show you a little bit of what happened with him. Okay, so this is on the Wikipedia. I just kind of skipped down to the part where it says relationship with Polish Jews. All right, and this is very important to kind of understand. It says here that Casimir was favorably disposed towards Jews. On October the 9th of 1334, he confirmed the privileges granted to Jewish Poles in 1264 by Boleslav V the Chaste. Under penalty of death, he prohibited the kidnapping of Jewish children for the purpose of enforced Christian baptism, and he inflicted heavy punishments for the desecration of Jewish cemeteries. While Jews have lived in Poland since before his reign, Casimir allowed them to settle in Poland in great numbers and protected them as people of the king. Okay, now when you go into other information as well, as far as the people that came up after him, they started implementing certain policies as well that was, also protecting, all right, these so-called Jews. Because when it talks about disposal of the Jews, this is the reason why it's kind of important to understand the time frames, because by this time, a lot of them Amalekites was coming out of those caves of Eastern Europe, and they were settling into Poland. And if you go into the history of these so-called Jews, once they left the Khazar Empire and converted into the Talmudic Judaism, they were able to use that influence of calling themselves Jews, and they used that influence to basically usurp, all right, some of these different kingdoms that were west of them. And that's how they took control slowly but surely. All right. Now, and what happened was certain legislation started being passed later on down the line under future rulers after King Casimir died, that basically allowed them to be granted special rights and protections as well. And that's the reason why, if you look up, I'm not going to put it up here, and that's a whole nother lesson. But if you look up the history of Poland, all right, and the so-called Jews that were in Poland, you'll realize that the Polish so-called Jews, that was their center, their hub culturally in Europe. That was like their main place that they really settled in large number. In fact, Poland had the largest number of so-called Jews. And that's why if you go into like a lot of these people that are in Hollywood, some of these politicians, you go into their history, a lot of times you'll find out that they're usually from two or three different areas. They're either from Poland, their great grandparents are either from Poland, they're either from Russia, or they're from Germany. That's where like a lot of these so-called Jews came from. They came from a lot of those regions because of the fact that those were where a large number of them were settled at during that time. And them being in that central part of Europe really helped them influence both sides of Europe, your Western and your Eastern Europe. So it was a lot of stuff that was geopolitically set by them being in that central region of Europe. And it really kind of, from that epicenter, it kind of allowed them to wield that influence and start taking over, or start basically destabilizing different kingdoms, different rulerships that were around them. So kind of going into this, just to kind of finish it off, of course, this is an icon lesson, but of course this is a history lesson, just kind of show you, what type of things that were going on. And this is part of the reason why Jake can't get the kingdom now, man. Jake is too destroyed as a people to get the kingdom, because he would just commit the same mistakes. That's the reason why we need to be delivered. That's the reason why we need to have the laws written on our inward part, because Jake is not going to be able to hold the kingdom to himself without wanting to give it to his enemy. Okay? So that's the reason why a lot of these Edomites were able to take over our people, because our people allowed them to basically come in, settle in large numbers, and then later on they started giving them access and tools to basically eventually overtake us. So this is Sirach 12 and verse 10. Never trust thine enemy, for like as iron rusted, so is his wickedness. Though he humbleth himself and go crouching down, yet take good heed and beware of him. And thou shalt be unto him as if thou hast wiped a looking glass, and thou shalt know that his rust hath not been altogether wiped away. Because what was happening is, you think that these people, right, are gonna just all of a sudden, they're gonna come crouching down when they know that they have no power. And that's what these devils did, man. You see how proud these Edomites are today. They weren't like that during the time of the Middle Ages. They came in a humble manner because they knew that they were not in the power seat. But all they did was just knew that if they just built up and played this behind the scenes long enough, that they knew that eventually they're going to take, the front, man. They knew eventually that they were going to take Jake down. And that's what happened to Jake. Jake was letting these Edomites get beside them, and then over time they ended up taking them down. And now you see Edomites walking around with names that you see that were back in the Middle Ages on Jake. All those different names, all those different crowns, some of those different customs that people think are so-called, white customs that actually came from Jake. Just like when you see videos, if you go on the YouTube, seen a video when they were talking about there's actually a festival or something like that in Europe and over there in Poland, where they're talking about, winning King Casimir's great sword, and you got people over there doing little middle-aged fighting and stuff like that, thinking that, they're really those people, which again, some of them could be, some of them could go back to Jake, but I'm saying as a whole, as far as your people from Poland, now, most of the vast majority of them are going to be Edomites. But then you got them thinking that they're actually those people, because why? They go and later on, when they do that whole iconoclasm, they create the different statues and images, and they say, look, we're this person or these people. And then people today, when you go back and tell them, because it's been hidden from their eyes, that we ruled, that information is sealed and hidden, because when they look up someone like King Casimir, they're not going to find these images. And then now, through the Spirit, I'm just bringing it out, because of the fact that it's going to be edifying for whenever you see somebody on the block. You never know. Like, we got to be all things to all men. So you might have someone that might be from Poland, then you could bring out King Casimir. You might be able to show an image and say, hey, look, we ruled during that time. We had our people that were scattered over there, and some of them are still going to be over there. And that could be enough to kind of, lead someone to start thinking, you know what, maybe I do come from that. And then maybe through the Spirit, they might be edified, and then they might come into the fold. Because, see, man, we're trying to get the heck out of here, man. We don't need to have a certain level of feeling that Israel has to come from a certain place, or we've been all scattered. That's why the Most High did what he did to us, man, to take away the pride from man. He took it away to where he said, listen, you're not going to, in the latter days, I'm going to take you out of the land, and y'all all going to come back through the banner. We're not going to come back through the carnal ways of our mind. We're going to come through the Spirit and allow the Spirit and let Yahawah, bahasham, Yahawashi get the glory at the end. Okay? And then when you go further on, it says here, set him not by thee, lest when he had overthrown thee, he stand in thy place, neither let him sit at thy right hand, lest he seek to take thy seat, and thou at the last remember my words and be pricked therewith. And that's what you see here with the image, all right, the original image of King Casimir the Great, and then you have the false image, all right, of King Casimir shown as an Edomite. And so it just shows you right there that these people took our place, going back to the time of the fall of Jake after the end of the Middle Ages, to the rise of Esau in the Renaissance period, all the way up until now. So again, I want to give all praises and glory to Yahawah, bahasham, Yahawashi, and double honor to the apostles and elders in Yasharahla, and salutation to the Ahchyam towards the 4 points of the earth, preaching the truth and sincerity, and keeping the faith of Yahawashi and the gospel. Shalawam.